Moving forward, ladies and gentlemen, now we arrive at the final session of TIOL Tax Congress, which is about the much talked about GST and the road ahead. Now, GST has been a game changer for India's tax ecosystem, streamlining compliance, boosting revenue, and transforming the business landscape. However, the challenges remain, and the road ahead is crucial for further simplifications, as suggested on most of the panels, dispute resolutions, and aligning with global best practices. And how is that to be done? That is exactly what we'll get to learn from our very esteemed panel of experts coming up next. So please put your hands together as I invite onto the stage Shri Rohan Shah to be on the panel for this session. Do we have Mr. Rohan Shah here with us? We'll quickly get him back in. Shri Pratik Jain, Partner, Indirect Taxes, PwC. I request you to please join us on stage. Shri Rohan Shah, the designated senior advocate, a renowned tax lawyer with over 3 decades of experience in handling both advisory and litigation matters related to indirect taxes, including GST, custom duties, etc., and recognized as India's, not just India's, Asia's leading tax lawyer. He's been featured in several prestigious legal publications. And this panel, ladies and gentlemen, will be moderated by Shri Pratik Jain, Partner, Indirect Taxes of PwC. He has a demonstrated history of working in the management consulting industry and skilled in handling issues with respect to GST and indirect taxes. We're also very glad to have amongst us Shri Sunil Kothare, Senior Counsel, HDFC Bank. He's an experienced professional with a demonstrated history of working in the financial services industry and provides digital solution implement strategy in the regulatory space for the financial sector. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Kothare. We're also being joined by Shri Prashant Bhatnagar, who with over 33 years of experience, including extensive work in finance and tax leadership roles, will be sharing his insights on indirect taxes and GST as a part of this panel. A very warm welcome to you. Shri Pramod Jain, tax head of Flipkart. He has expertise in cashless and expedited outcomes of tax disputes. He was also a member of CBDT's panel on taxation of digital economy. And finally, on the session we have with us Shri Hiral Raja, Associate Vice President at Asian Paints. He's a commerce graduate from University of Mumbai and a fire-trained chartered accountant. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking out of your busy schedules and joining us. Can we have a round of applause and get the session started? Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Jain.
Thank you. I think it's good to see that the number of panel members is equal to the audience members. Almost. Maybe we'll outnumber the audience. So maybe this is, we will perhaps give you some more time, which we have lost in the day. The session was supposed to start at, can you hear me? Yeah. The session was supposed to start at 4:20. Now we are almost 5. So what we'll do is, and I hope that this is being recorded and be circulated on TIOL website or things like that, so that more people can see what we have to talk about. But we will, what we'll do is we will try and sort of do a little bit of crystal ball gazing in terms of what kind of GST should we have, what are the issues that we have, and what are the big ideas on GST, and we'll try and segment this discussion in 3 baskets. One is legislative reforms, what kind of legislation do we require? Second is administrative reforms, and then maybe coming to the compliance, technology, and what are the big ideas that we have on GST. So of course you have been introduced to the panel members. To my right, Rohan Shah. I think I'll start with you, if that's okay. And we were talking about GST when it started. There's a goods and simple tax, but we all know that might be good, but not simple for sure. And on the disputes, there has been a lot of discontent, so to say, from industry. Of course, the whole advanced ruling mechanism hasn't worked that much. The tribunal is still getting set up. We still have fundamental issues which are being debated and so on. And to top it all, if Supreme Court decides in certain manner, We have also seen a retroactive amendment happening to that. So I just wanted to start with you, Rohan, to say that if you look at last few years of GST when it came in and where we are now, it does require a lot of simplification from a legislative standpoint, and also specific focus as to how can we reduce the disputes. So what are your thoughts on what are the legislative interventions that we can do, and what other things, other mechanisms that can be brought in to reduce litigation on GST?
Yeah. So Pratik, I take it you want the first round of just quick comments, right? Because what you're asking of me is going to take a little time. So do you want me to address it now?
No, I think we can talk about it. I guess. Okay.
So let me sort of start first by saying that I think you will need to really look at all three in a synergistic manner. What legislative changes you need, what structural changes you need, and quite honestly, what mindset changes you need. Because unless the three come together, it's not going to happen, right? Two themes that I think everyone should really keep in mind, both on the side of government and assessees, is that when you litigate in indirect tax, the biggest problem you have is that by nature an indirect tax is something a business should be able to pass on. The moment you create a liability, whether it goes back 2 years or 5 years, essentially you leave the business with no capability of passing on that burden of tax. And when that burden of tax is then augmented by interest and penalty, you're basically saying 1 rupee of tax difference in the nature of a dispute is 2.25 rupees of liability. Now that is just a dead cost to the business. So the first thing we have to remember is, in indirect tax litigation, you cannot have the luxury of a dispute having a life greater than 6 months. So I think you have to first work on ensuring a final decision of every dispute in 6 months. The second thing, which I think is much more fundamental, you cannot say that every divergence of opinion must become a dispute. The current system is, if between assessee and government, we have a divergence of view, it is a litigation, and if that litigation is of a value greater than 2 crores, it will go to the Supreme Court of India. And if it goes to the Supreme Court of India, the life of that litigation is anywhere between 12 years, if you're very lucky, to 18 years before it will come to an end. So I think these are two fundamental issues. Legislatively, what could we do? Legislatively, the one thing I would definitely do is to ensure that every rupee of tax paid becomes either credit or refund. Indirect tax system, which we say is based on the pillar of credit, cannot have a situation where your rupee of tax is not becoming credit or is not becoming a refund because you have, 50% of what I do in court is centered around section 17(5). Now, you cannot have a system based on the factor that I have honestly paid tax or somebody else has paid tax. It is in the coffers of the revenue, but I cannot get credit. This will become a dispute. So I think issue one really for me would be that. The second issue is, quite honestly, you can maybe do away with 70% of litigation if you follow one principle and you legislate it. That in any case where the tax in dispute will become a credit, the case needs to be closed only on an affirmation that this amount of tax will become a credit. The third thing legislatively we need to do is make a legislative distinction between interpretational litigation and fraud litigation. If there is an interpretational litigation, whether it be tax rate, whether it be value, whether it be credit, that needs to go into a separate track, and the legislation needs to provide it will not attract interest and it will not attract penalty. All cases of fraud, you not only can segregate, you can have higher rate of interest and you can have penal interest even to a multiple. But this situation which we have today, that every case ultimately has an interest cost and has a penal cost, is really just unthinkable in the world of indirect tax. The other change I think which is significant and required is structural. Our courts are overwhelmed. We cannot, with the current system, of the, adjudication tribunal, High Court, Supreme Court, address the litigation we even have today. Really, we have to look for an answer for outside of this. And I think the answer really is, as you rightly mentioned, the advance ruling, I'm sorry to say, is actually a fraud on the citizen. It is just has no credibility. What we need, and this is where I think I would take a leaf from the current Chief Justice, we need to bring back retired judges, tribunal members, and people who have served on the central board, people who have served as chief commissioners, get special advance ruling tribunals, set up 2 benches each, one for classification, one for valuation, have time-bound adjudication, and let any issue which is contentious be referred to them, whether you are in the process of starting a business or whether you're in the middle of your business cycle, get this adjudicated by an integrous tribunal. And there also, really cut the crap of the lawyers. When we go and plead in London, they tell us you have 3 hours, Mr. Shah, and dare you go over that by 1 second. We all follow that. We don't ask for adjournments. So I think these alternate tribunals must also have a procedure, which is a procedure to say written pleadings of not more than 15 pages each, because nobody wins an argument on the 99th ground of appeal, right? So 15 pages of arguments, 1 hour each to argue, any rebuttals 1 hour, and the tribunal must be obliged to pass and render judgment within 12 weeks. If you are able to do this, you are going to address what is coming in the future. For the past, again, I believe at every forum, whether it's the Supreme Court or it's the High Courts or the tribunal, I think we need to find more manpower, and a lot of it will come now from retired judges. Fast track the key issues, correlate through now what you have in terms of AI, etc. All similar cases. You will find that if you decide 23 key issues, you will probably take care of 68% of the litigation. If you can decide 23 key issues in the next 6 months, 68% of the litigation will be gone. And I think, in all the innovation we talk of, and if all the groundbreaking stuff we want to do, the one thing I would set myself to, if I mattered in the system, would be to say that GST will be non-litigious in a manner of 5 years.
This sounds like a utopian world to me. I mean, 6 months for litigation closure, I guess, unthinkable. But on the tribunal part of it, I mean, GST tribunal is going to be set up. If you have to make some suggestions, Rohan, because you did mention about AI, and can we bunch together the cases? Because there's a huge plethora of cases which will go to tribunal, right? Because it's all stuck at this point in time at various levels, and in some cases, high courts have given stays because tribunal is not there, etc. Suddenly, when the tribunal comes in, I don't have the data, but must be hundreds of thousands of cases which will go there. So how can we expedite that piece over the next few months after setting it up?
Yeah, so the biggest issue in terms of the delay in forming the tribunal is you have a 7-year backlog. And by the time they are functional in the July or August, which is the earliest expectation, you will have 8 years of backlog, which needs to be addressed. Now, the only way through this is really technology, to take cases of a similar topic, cases which have a certain footprint, club them together, and have a procedural roster for the tribunal, which replicates what I'm saying, which is pleadings in writing, no adjournments, and arguments in a matter of 3 hours or whatever, judgments to be rendered in the context of a maximum of 8 to 12 weeks. That's the only way we will get rid of the backlog. And the other situation which we've seen before, which is regional tribunals taking different views, that having to go through high courts, I think you have to systematize this. By irrespective of region, you appoint one bench, let everybody plead there, let that issue be decided there, and that really then has a quietus. So it is going to be a massive challenge because you have the SESTAT going on in parallel. You have the new tribunal. And, I was talking to one of the very, very senior Supreme Court judges. He says, we have close to 62,000 cases of indirect tax. And he says, you see the 34 judges who've come. He says, we've had very little exposure. So we are learning the law, and quite honestly, it doesn't help us. He said that on a normal Wednesday or Thursday, when they take up final hearings, he says the number of adjournments on my roster, he says at least 80% of my matters get adjourned. So they are endemic issues, and unless we take on a big battle with a really strong heart, you know, we will be having these conversations 15 years from today.
Big battle with strong heart.
Pratik,
Yes,
just to corroborate, just to add to what he's saying, I have been working with multinational companies for 35 plus years now. One of the issues which has been very often raked across by the global leaders is that you guys don't have an early clarity in your taxation systems and the litigations. Very small example, which I may very openly quote out here, is anti-profiteering was something which could have been addressed much more sooner, right? There were things which were very ambiguous, could have been addressed much sooner. Marketing intangible, the day industry has been shouting about that this is not fair on certain aspects, should have been addressed, right? Government could have taken the right steps and early resolution to those issues which are ticklish. I must say that 60% of the issues are very similar across the industry, the way they will look at the value-wise. So either those kind of clarities, including the advanced pricing arrangements and advanced rulings, should be very, very robust, and I think that's what I would rest my opinion.
Sure, but to give credit to government to some extent, I mean, they have now come in with dispute resolution, Vivad Se Vishwas, etc., and also safe harbor rule expansion and new income tax code. Hopefully, some of that will be simplified. Coming to Pramod, you and I know that on legislative simplicity, you have some favorite sort of topics, and one of that Rohan did touch upon was input tax credit. But if you have one wish on the legislative simplicity, what would that be?
So why one only, Pratik? I'll have two. At least one should be granted. So if we look at the whole input tax credit, the way it is getting stuck with the government, and it's an interest-free money which sits there forever. A lot of startups which are coming up in the initial first 5 years, 3 years, they are all making losses and input tax credit gets blocked. Construction companies, infrastructure companies, where completion of a project will take several years and the input tax credit is still blocked. So there should be a mechanism similar to income tax where you get your refunds at the end of every year once you have filed the returns and your assessment gets completed. You should get an automatic refund rather than the credits getting piled up. And this is a similar story in the telecom industry also, where government collects a lot of GST through RCM mechanism. So that's one on the GST road ahead. And second will be this whole blocked credit concept, which leads to a lot of disputes also, which Rohan also touched upon. So the 17.5, 17.3 kind of things, could go away. GST will truly become seamless. That could mean that there has to be a readjustment of the GST rates to meet the revenue considerations. So be it. That should not make the industry so unhappy. But blocking credits in the name of rent-a-cab services, staff welfare services, which are legitimate, genuine business expenditure for income tax, but GST does not consider them as legitimate business expenditure and the credit is disallowed. So there is a contradiction, inherent contradiction within the law itself. So these will be two things, Pratik, I'd like to touch on.
Hiral, anything from you? I mean, anything which you want to add to this list?
Yeah, so two things. I think as we rightly heard, input tax credit is one area where we find lots of litigations happening, and ultimately we all had lots of judgments in the service tax, but today the department doesn't follow them and agree with those also. Second thing is the block credit concept which is there, which is really hurting the industry. And the blockage of the credit really disturbs the chain, and this acts as a backdrop entry for us. Second point on the litigation, also I would like to add is, maybe just to give an example, we all have seen on the long-term lease of land, GST was levied. So when the companies bought these lands, they paid GST, they paid stamp duty. And today there's a Gujarat High Court judgment that says that that GST was not leviable. Now obviously companies have paid it. How do companies claim these refunds? And it was always an interest in the right of the land, which technically was always a debatable issue, but GST Council decided to still put GST on that. If such litigative issues are avoided right from the beginning, or now also if there's a retrospective clarification on that, that really helps the industry to get the refund out of it, and that helps it.
Thank you. Anything, Sunil, from you? I mean, on this, I know that you would like to talk about administrative reforms, which is my second, but anything on the law per se?
I'll just look at how the technology piece is evolving, and I take from what Mr. Sinha said earlier. He talked of how the GST structure look like in 2027. And I'm wondering whether it is possible to tie what his team is doing with the law itself and the wish list of all my co-panelists, that you treat the entire ITC as one funded pool. And Kerala High Court has said so in so many words just last week. Can we not have a scenario where the distribution to the states of their respective shares can be done at the back end without the taxpayer having to do state-wise filing, state-wise allocation, with all the data being there? Maybe this is forward-looking, but this is what I would look at.
Okay, now shifting gears, I guess, on the administrative part of it, and this is one aspect which is perhaps not talked very often, right? I mean, we talk about compliances, we talk about technology, we talk about, okay, what should be the rate structure, but how should the administration be look like, right? So you have center, you have state, you have understanding of states in many cases, particularly the service sector is an issue, different states following different processes. No sector specialization, so to say. At the beginning of GST, you still have had some committees to engage with the industry on various issues, on FMCG, on financial services, I remember, and so on. But that's not there anymore. We also think that there is, you know, let's say lack of integration between income tax and GST in many ways. I mean, there are countries where if you pay excess income tax, you can offset against GST and so on. You have a common tax administration between direct tax and indirect tax, and so on and so forth. There is a taxpayer charter, for example, for income taxes, but not for GST, and so on. So I just want to touch upon the administrative part of it. What are the top one or two things come in your mind, and Sunil, starting with you, that how do we build the reform framework on the administrative side, and how can we look at taxpayer trust, and how can we look at upskilling for the government as well as the taxpayers?
So Pratik, I would start off on a positive note, that in her speech during the budget presentation, the Honorable Finance Minister said that she's starting with trusting the taxpayer. And that, while she announced it on 1st February, I thought some of it started when GST was introduced. There was all those specific committees were there. There was FAQ issue. And somehow, for some reason, many of us felt that was a good thing, and we could discuss with the government and saying that this is the new model that's coming in. What is your view? Of course, for reasons that Rohan has explained, not too many of us were keen to go for advanced ruling. And yet, somewhere along the lines in the last 7.5 years, that dialogue has kind of reduced. That is not to say that we do not get a hearing, at least the large players or industry groups get a hearing, a fair hearing from the CBIC. What is perhaps missing is a link that what the industry presents to the CBIC, to what extent it reaches the GST Council and in what form. And can the GST Council consider some of the representations from the industry before they actually decide, in a kind of pre-consultation? That is something that one can think of. Second, again, at the very senior level, there is trust and faith. But on the field, if somebody has been trained, whether as a taxpayer or as a tax administrator, to think that the other person has something to hide or is not correctly revealing facts, it is very difficult to untrain oneself. And I'm not saying only the tax authorities, it is also for the taxpayers who feel, I mean, isme kam nahi ho sakta hai kya? That is the kind of question that maybe a small to medium taxpayer asks. But a large one never asks that way, because he has to think of what will happen to my listing price, what will happen to my shareholder value. So large taxpayers don't generally think of tax as a means of adding to the bottom line. And therefore, once that is established as a matter of faith and trust, then it becomes easier. Third, and this is the last point so that the other panelists have to say, is if the field level officials feel that something is really a matter where a different view could be taken, So be it, and they honestly discuss it, and then it is taken to the central committee for a discussion, which is also a fair thing. But is it all pervasive? I'm not sure that it is. If all these things can come in, we'll have a simplified tax structure, and we'll have ease of doing business.
And Prashant, coming to you, on administration, one thing which I feel is that the government has to do what they have to do. For example, a lot of fake invoices were coming in, and therefore we had to have a tighter GST registration mechanism. But then can you then look at, based on the risk parameters, that who the guys were likely to, let's say, defraud, and based on the size of the company and so on, the same registration rule applies for companies who are opening a new subsidiaries, could be a largest group in India, in that sense. So you have worked in multinational for a number of years. What is your take that, do they think that Indian GST system, while it is simplified, but still not like one nation, one tax kind of a thing, what do you think is the image of India as far as GST administration is concerned? But more importantly, what do you think we can do to improve that image?
Sure. Thanks, Pratik. I think we are sitting at the crucial transition time, right? Historically, as I said, I have been working for more than 3 decades with these large multinational companies. Impression about India has been it's a land of ludicrous tax systems. We have taken a huge leap since then. We have moved ahead. From all that red chart where I used to sit with the mergers, acquisitions, and all those kind of meetings, I used to find it difficult to justify why not China, why not India as compared to China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and plenty of other competitive countries. We used to be compared with Brazil's for the compliance. One data point very quickly, I would like to say that a few years back, our tax manager the tax department used to spend 40% of its time in compliance, 40% in litigations and audit, and rest 20% in all the value add and other matters that it used to do. It all translates to numbers, of course, on the number of people in the tax department, but that's a percentage break. We have come down to anything around 15 to 20% on compliance, due respect to the great work that's being done by the government. The litigation still continues to be 30% after all the amnesty and other support that government has exceeded. There's a lot to be done, and we talked about it. The fact is the global standard in the compliance front still stands at 10 and 15%. And then the large countries like our neighbors, who have huge investments in their country, they're sitting on zero. I was sitting on 250 litigations on a day when we had presented across ourselves for investments. But China had a zero over this thing. I must say that that's not fair at all. We need to have some mid path, otherwise you don't have a say. Industry doesn't have a say in the litigation, that doesn't take us anywhere. But broadly, to keep the things in perspective, checks and balances are very crucial, Pratik, and we need to have it, no arguments about it. But I think somewhere government also needs to make sure that the organized companies versus unorganized sectors needs to be separately treated as far as the audits and the assessments are concerned. We need to make sure that the government needs to make sure that the litigations are not piled up year after year for X number of reasons. The organized sectors are not being questioned to the extent of their integrity. So those kind of things have its own pain points, clearly, and I think those are certain things that need to be addressed across.
Can it be done? Or it'll be challenged to courts to say no equality and things like that. How can you make a distinction in law between organized and unorganized?
No. Look, I think if you ask a threshold question, that fundamentally, should the tax assessee and the tax collector actually have a core agenda which is different? The answer should be no. The core agenda of the tax collector and the tax assessee is certainty. I want to know what tax I have to pay. The tax person wants to know how much tax he'll collect. If certainty is the core, and we are allied on certainty, then the question to ask is how do we achieve it? Now, I don't think you can say, formally organized, unorganized, but let's apply the 80-20 principle to tax. If 80% of your revenues come from 20,000 entities and 20% of your revenues come from 2 crore entities, you could work a mechanism with those who give you 80% to do 2 things. Can we do a risk and certainty audit with you? What is a risk and certainty audit? We come into you, you tell us where you think there may be interpretational issues, we tell you where we think you might have interpretational issues, and let's take that to a credible advanced ruling authority, ex-Supreme Court judges, whatever. We'll achieve certainty. Does any important industry create a profit plan by tax arbitrage? The universal answer is no. So if nobody's ultimate goal is tax arbitrage, if everybody's ultimate goal is tax certainty, the nation wants tax certainty, the tax department wants tax certainty, then really I'm asking, how difficult is it to interact to create the 1-point agenda, tax certainty? Second, a 80-20 split of focus. And third, of course there will be divergences. How do we refer them to a forum, whether it is a advanced ruling forum, but I'm saying your advanced ruling forum needs to have ex-Supreme Court judges, High Court judges, ex-CBEC members. Get an answer in 3 to 6 months. This whole situation that doing business in India from a tax perspective is very difficult. I'm sure as a nation we want to leave it behind. You know, you talk to tax heads, and these are exaggerations sometimes, but one of them was saying 2% of my turnover is India. 90% of my litigation is India. But it's an unfair comment, because if our goal is the same, which is certainty of tax collection and tax payment, I think we can easily work to it.
Sure. I want to now change the track completely on and move to the compliance and technology part of it. And Mr. Manish and I are sitting here with us, and I think a lot of credit goes to him and his team to have done what they have done on the GST and over the last few years. I think all of us will say that compliances from the government side has been stabilized to a large extent. Of course, there are things like IMS which is coming in and it will take time to stabilize, but gone are the days where filing the return itself was a challenge, or e-invoicing in the initial days was a challenge. I think all of that we have passed. Now we are looking at B2C invoicing, hopefully, and we are looking at many more things. We are looking at AI and Gen AI and so on. In our world, in our firm, we think that, you know, in our team, there are 3,000 people in tax. You know, the same amount of work can be perhaps done by 2,000 people, right? Because we are creating a platform with a Gen AI base which say that, okay, if you show cause notice received, you can summarize, you can create a response to that and so on. And, you know, jury is still out as to how much can you do, can you trust? But my question, Pramod, to start with you, is that how do you see this technology and compliance ecosystem at this point in time? What's happening in your kind of world? What do you think we can do more on that?
So let me start with Pratik. So this is the first time we are seeing, and maybe our generation has seen, the generation sitting on the dais here, the 3 phases of tax reforms in India. Maybe all of us started our careers with excise and sales tax, moved into excise, service tax and VAT, and now into GST. So a huge reform has already happened. So while we are talking about GST road ahead, it's, you know, I'm an eternal optimist. A lot of things that we are talking about, government is listening, and those things will happen over a period of time. But what has happened over last several years, everything has become online filing. And when we deal with our US counterparts in Walmart, they are impressed and they are surprised that India has transformed. Even they are still, a lot of things are tracked on paper, paper credits, paper-based filings. And India, when we show them that I do not have even a desk in office, a proper desk, I can sit and operate from anywhere, they are thoroughly impressed. How India has dealt with this whole fake registrations, bogus registrations, fake invoicing, it's a big, big help to companies like e-commerce. As soon as the problem started creeping in, the technology took over, the mindsets of the officers took over, and those problems got eradicated. In the past, we used to see a lot of service tax frauds, input tax credit frauds. Now that's least of the problem, least of the worries. Now this IMS, I know a lot of people would have different views, but I'm a big supporter, huge supporter of IMS. I was complimenting Mr. Manish Sinha just before the discussion started. We were just discussing it 6 months back, and it came. And it's such a big help on tracking all the invoice acceptance, credit notes and all. Now, a lot of these pains are just going away. So people can focus. Compliance is no longer a pain area. It's very, very simple. What technology is going to do in future, again, role of human intervention, again, is going to reduce more and more. Yes, audits, again, there is still an old mindset that every taxpayer is a fraud. You have done something wrong. If you are sitting on a big fortune, that fortune has been built on crime. So that mindset has to change. In a lot of cases, we have seen the initial show cause notice is 1,000 crore. And finally, after the adjudication, it is reduced to 5 lakhs. And my CFO started taunting me, is it the way you scare me every time? So you come with 1,000 crore and you finally come and tell, oh, we explained everything and now it is reduced to 5 lakhs. So that whole respect for that number has gone away. So I would say, this is the first time I'm seeing, at least in my career, that technology in government is moving much faster. We are becoming breathless to catch up with the government, but that's a welcome change. Again, if a tech company cannot catch up with the government, who else will be? But it's the first time which is happening in India that government is moving so fast.
Thank you. Your comments?
Yeah. So first of all, let me start by complimenting the government, saying that we have seen the VAT era where there were 28 states, 28 laws, 28 different ways of filing returns and a lot of compliances. And you had to really put teams in 28 states to understand the things. Today, with this single law, with the kind of automation that's there, the organizations have been able to actually automate the entire compliance in such a way that you have built the efficiencies and capabilities there. Government has moved faster and that has helped us also, that has pushed us to actually see to it that we also move in that direction. Today, virtually everything gets automated. In fact, IRN is one very unique thing that very few countries have. That your invoice actually has an IRN that comes from the government side and then only it gets into the system. Today, we have subsidies in many countries, and there when we talk about it, they are surprised as to how come India has such a good automation that's there. And this has also helped us to ensure that the entire accounting process for these invoices becomes smoother. Because today you virtually come to know what your vendor has uploaded for you every day night. And these APIs easily help you to get the things into your systems back. And it helps us to understand what kind of transactions are coming into a system beforehand, whether is there anything that we need to take care of. While certainly there are some opportunities that I see, one is clearly maybe having multiple returns to be filed still. We can look at filing a single return and maybe having reconciliation 1 month late. But that helps the companies to work faster because today by 14th you get the GSTR 2B and you have to file all the returns for 28 states by 20th. It becomes really difficult for people to match everything and do it. If that reconciliation is delayed just by 1 month and file single return, it can still help. But kudos to the GSTN and the government for really implementing a very highly automated system for us.
Thank you. And I think sometimes you undermine the power of data. So I'll tell you, in my world, we were looking for one client. And we just said that, okay, the client was telling us that, look, you have my GST data for last 6-7 years. You have never come back to me to say that, what can I do with that data beyond GST compliances? And we said, okay, let's apply our mind. And we took like 1 year to apply our mind on that. But then we came back with analysis, and the analysis was so powerful. So there were examples like same raw material being supplied to 2 different factories of the same company with the same vendor at different rates. I'm just giving one example, right? Or you are awarding a contract to a vendor who is quoting you the highest in terms of raw material. So let's say raw material has 3 prices. Somebody who's quoting the highest is getting the highest number of orders. Okay? Or in some cases, we felt, looking at the outside in perspective, that something which the vendor is supplying at 100 rupees is available in the market at 80 rupees. And when we went with that analysis to that company, we were so surprised ourselves. And they were surprised as well, right? To say that, okay, now I want you to discuss with my board. So you don't realize that the GST data, which is your invoice level data, which is there with you from July 2017 onwards, how powerful it is. And you imagine you have data from the government side to say which medicine is going from which place to which place, and therefore what kind of disease could be there in that place, and therefore what effort do I need to make, from a Ministry of Health perspective. I think the potential is enormous. And I guess more and more, when we look at the automation that we have achieved, I think we should all be proud of that. Because the question is that how can we now monetize some of that data and information we already have? So I think we have only 3-4 minutes left, and I'm keen that we don't exceed our sort of mandate. So I'll just maybe close with everybody's comment, and I only want one comment, or one sort of thing, as to if you look at futuristic GST from 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 7 years from now, what is that one thing which comes to your mind, which you think is a big idea of GST? Maybe we'll start with Rohan, putting you on spot, and then come.
No, okay. Let me just say two things first, right? Let us as a nation never forget the enormity of what we've achieved by bringing GST. In the sort of structure we have, state, center, the federal structure, the constitution, the courts, firstly, never ever undermine the fact that we've pulled off the impossible in bringing a GST. The second, I think, great credit to Manish and, all those who work with him and have worked before him, that we truly have sort of world-class and beyond on many technical aspects. The thing we owe, and let me also not get this debate of what does the foreign company think of us. I'm saying there is one basic fact. Anyone who is a person who invests in India, Indian, foreign, I don't care, invest in India, creates jobs in India, how do we give him the best tax experience? That person, if he has great technology, he has legislation, he has a unique structure like GST Council, where states and centers sit together, I think it is our responsibility to now make the rest of the experience certain.
One big idea.
Yeah, that one big idea is focus relentlessly on doing two things. Certainty, elimination of litigation.
Certainty and elimination. Pramod?
Unblocking all input tax credits.
Depenalize input tax credit, declutter it, don't
Annual
have
refunds.
restrictions on input tax credit. Hiral?
So in the past, we had some one structure called LTU, and where all the central taxes, both excise and service tax as well as income tax, one single decision was taken. So I'm looking at least the states where CGST authorities are doing the scrutiny, if that can still be brought back, gives good certainty to the companies.
Like a LTU for administration. Sunil?
Very simple, easy of implementation is my suggestion of one single MIS going to the government from any taxpayer, one single payment, the allocation between states will be done at the back end.
One single MIS, one single payment.
Yes, not multiple returns, multiple payments of tax to upload those returns. So if he has got 28 registrations, not 28 returns, one single MIS
One
on the
single
PAN.
return. Okay. Fine.
And single payment.
Single payment as well. Yes?
Mine is simple. It's an extensive use of AI. I'm sure it's being done today, but I think we can reach to the state where life would be much simpler for Indian investors anymore. So.
More use of AI. Any questions, comments, anybody from the audience? We have 1 minute and 9 seconds left. So anything which you would want to say, any questions? Okay, we have some. Do you have a mic here somewhere? Or you can take our mic. No mic. Okay, you can maybe ask the question. I guess.
Yeah, you can take my mic.
Should
You
not
can
be a
take this mic.
Yes.
I think ITC is something which is very important to be liberalized, I think. And I have seen personally officers are using 155. They specifically says now it's your burden. Prove it unless I'll deny it, which was not a concept or which was not being sold as a GST. It was being
So
sold
you're
as a
saying
task
that tax has to be paid by the vendor before you claim the credit. You
Yeah.
have to prove as a buyer
Yes.
that tax has been paid. That's more of a legislative issue. Any
So
quick comment?
initially GST was sold saying that you'll have ITC very easily. And if you have documentation to prove it, you can have that. But now the officers are not taking that benefit. They are putting onus on the taxpayer saying that either if you see me an invoice, give me a tax amount, you have paid it, or other documents, unless you prove it, I'll say you're a bogus, which is
Okay,
incorrect.
so listen, but time is already up, okay? And I think nobody can answer it in 1 minute. So we'll perhaps end this here. But you have Mr. Rahman sitting here, Mr. Manish Sinha sitting here. Maybe outside you can catch hold of him and ask the government point of view on that. But let me thank you. There are few people in the audience, but you have been patient and you have been sitting there for the entire session. So thanks a lot for this, and we pass it on for the next session. Thank you very much. Thank you to my panelists as well.
A big thank you to all the panelists for bringing their deep insights onto this panel. I request all of you to please get together for a group photograph. And Abhishek from TIOL, if I could have you please present the small tokens of appreciation that we have for all our panelists.